The high priest stood up so fast his chair scraped against the stone floor. His hands went straight to his robes, and he tore them. Not because he was sad, because what he had just heard was, to him, unspeakable. Jesus had called himself the Son of Man. Most people today hear that phrase and think it sounds modest. Almost like Jesus was saying, "Hey, I'm just a regular guy." But every single person in that courtroom felt the air leave the room the moment those words came out. Their jaws tightened, their eyes went wide, because what Jesus said wasn't humble at all. It was the most explosive thing a human being could say out loud. And here's the strange part. Most of us have been getting it wrong our whole lives. This isn't some small detail buried in a footnote. Jesus says, "Son of Man," over 80 times in the Gospels. 80. It's the title he reaches for more than any other. He rarely calls himself the Messiah in public. He almost never uses that word. But this phrase? He keeps coming back to it, again and again, like he wants people to really hear it. So what if we haven't been hearing it at all? Because if we're mishearing the one title Jesus used most, the words he chose every time he wanted to say something true about himself, then we might be mishearing Jesus himself. That changes everything. Picture a Saturday morning, maybe 30 years before Jesus stood before the high priest. A small town in Galilee. A synagogue made of rough stone, packed with people sitting close together on wooden benches. A reader stands at the front, unrolling a long scroll. He reads in Hebrew, the old, sacred language. Then another man translates, sentence by sentence, into Aramaic, the everyday language that regular people actually spoke. Children fidget. Old men lean forward. Women listen from behind a dividing screen. The words being read are from the book of Daniel. And here is something most people don't realize. For everyone in that room, Daniel wasn't old history. It wasn't the way we might read about ancient Egypt or the Roman Empire, distant and done with. For them, it was alive. It was personal. Their grandparents had lived under a ruler named Antiochus Epiphanes, a Greek king who marched into Jerusalem, set up a pagan altar in the temple, and forced Jewish people to either betray their faith or die. Some were burned alive, some were tortured. The book of Daniel had been passed around during those years like a secret letter, full of coded hope. Hold on, God sees this, rescue is coming. Then came the Romans. Different boots, same heavy weight on their necks. So when the scroll of Daniel was read out loud in that synagogue, nobody sat back and thought about ancient literature. They leaned in, because every word felt like it was written for right now. Now open that scroll to Daniel chapter 7. Because this is where everything changes. Daniel describes a dream. In it, 4 enormous beasts rise up out of a churning sea. One like a lion, one like a bear, one like a leopard, and a fourth one so terrifying Daniel can barely describe it. Most Bible scholars agree on what these beasts represent: 4 world empires. Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. One after another, they rise up, devour, and destroy. They are brutal, they are hungry, and they rule through violence. Then the scene shifts. An ancient figure appears. Daniel calls him the Ancient of Days, and he takes his seat on a throne that blazes with fire. The court is called to order. The beasts lose their power. And then, coming on the clouds of heaven, appears someone Daniel describes as one like a son of man. In Aramaic, the everyday language of Jewish people, that phrase, bar anash, simply means a human figure. A person, someone who looks like a man. But here's what most people miss completely. This human figure doesn't bow before the Ancient of Days. He is brought before him, and then given authority, glory, and a kingdom over every nation. A kingdom that never ends. He is the one who replaces the beasts. Where the empires ruled through crushing force, this figure rules with something else entirely. So when a first-century Jewish person heard the words, Son of Man, they didn't hear humility. They heard Daniel 7. They heard a throne. They heard a cosmic claim that made the Roman Empire look small. Now go back to that courtroom. Back to the high priest. Back to the torn robes. The high priest asks Jesus a direct question. Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus answers him straight. I am, he says. And then he keeps going, and this is the part that splits the room in two. You will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power, coming on the clouds. Let's slow that down, because every single word is doing something. coming on the clouds. That is Daniel 7, word for word. Any Jewish scholar in that room would have recognized it instantly. Jesus isn't reaching for a poetic image. He is pointing directly at that vision, the one with the beasts, the throne, the Ancient of Days. He is saying, that figure in the dream? That's me, seated at the right hand of power. In Daniel's vision, the Son of Man is brought before the Ancient of Days and given a kingdom. To sit at someone's right hand in that culture meant you shared their authority. Jesus is saying he isn't just receiving a kingdom someday, he is being placed at the center of how history ends. And here's the piece that almost nobody talks about. Jesus says this while standing in chains, on trial, surrounded by the most powerful religious men in Jerusalem, backed by the full force of Rome. He is, by every earthly measure, completely powerless in that moment. And he calls himself the figure who replaces the empires. That means he is also saying something about the men in that room, and the empire standing behind them. Without using their names, without pointing a single finger, he is telling them exactly where they fit in Daniel's vision. They are the last beast. And their time is almost up. Jesus wasn't simply making a claim about what he was made of. He was making a claim about where history was heading, and who was driving it there. Mark is a careful writer. And he does something in this part of his gospel that most readers walk right past. He builds a sandwich. Outside in the courtyard, Peter is standing by a fire. A servant girl looks at him and says, "You were with Jesus." Peter shakes his head. It happens again, and again. 3 times, someone gives him a chance to tell the truth about who he is and who he knows, and 3 times, Peter shrinks. He gets smaller with every denial. By the 3rd time, he is swearing he never knew the man at all. Meanwhile, inside, Jesus is doing the opposite. He is surrounded by armed men. He has no allies in the room. The most powerful religious court in the country is staring him down, looking for a reason to hand him to Rome. And when they ask him the most dangerous question they could possibly ask, he answers it. Fully, clearly, without flinching. Mark places these 2 scenes side by side on purpose. The contrast is the message. Peter, a free man standing by a warm fire, cannot hold on to the truth under mild social pressure. Jesus, a prisoner standing before a court that wants him dead, will not let go of it under any pressure at all. That is what true humanity looks like, Mark is saying. Not shrinking, not performing, just telling the truth about yourself, even when it costs everything. But there's another layer underneath this, and it goes all the way back to Daniel. In Daniel's vision, the beasts rise up from the sea. In the ancient world, the sea represented chaos, the deep, dark, unpredictable abyss where monsters lived. The empires don't come from order. They come from disorder. They are born out of violence and fear. The Son of Man comes from a completely different direction. He comes from above, from the clouds, from somewhere the chaos cannot reach. Mark builds his trial scene on that same architecture. The courtroom feels chaotic. False witnesses contradicting each other, shouting, confusion, a rigged process falling apart at the seams. But Jesus stands in the middle of it like something the chaos cannot touch. The trial isn't the moment everything breaks down. It's the moment everything finally clicks into place. Here is something that will quietly change the way you read your Bible. The phrase, Son of Man, doesn't start with Jesus. It doesn't even start with Daniel. It runs like a deep river through the entire Hebrew Bible, picking up weight and meaning every time it appears, and by the time Jesus uses it, it is carrying centuries of history inside it. Start with Ezekiel. God calls Ezekiel, Son of Man, in Hebrew, Ben Adam, over 90 times. More than Jesus uses it in all 4 Gospels combined. And every single time, it means the same thing. A human being standing upright before God, chosen to speak the truth to a people who don't want to hear it. Ezekiel is frail. He is made of dust. And yet God keeps calling him by this name and sending him back out to speak anyway. The phrase carries both things at once, weakness and appointment. Then open the Psalms. Psalm chapter 8 asks a question that stops you cold. What is a human being, that God even notices them? What is the Son of Man, that God cares for him? The psalmist is amazed that God would look down at something so small and fragile, and then crown it with glory. Psalm chapter 80 uses the same language, crying out for a Son of Man whom God would strengthen and use to save his people. So before Daniel ever has his vision, the phrase already means something rich and layered. It means a creature made from dust, noticed by God, appointed to speak, destined to be raised up. Then Daniel takes all of that and stretches it to the edges of history. The Son of Man isn't just a prophet anymore. He isn't just a creature God is fond of. He is the one who stands before the throne of heaven and receives a kingdom that never ends. Jesus knew every one of these threads. He grew up reading them, singing them, breathing them in. When he reached for the phrase, Son of Man, he wasn't picking a random title. He was pulling all three strands at once: the dusty prophet, the creature lifted from nothing, the cosmic ruler of history, and wrapping them around himself. 2 words, the entire arc of the Hebrew Bible folded inside them. The Sanhedrin knew Daniel's vision better than almost anyone alive. They read it, they taught it, they guarded it like a treasure passed down through generations. So when Jesus stood before them in that torchlit courtroom and said, "The Son of Man coming on the clouds," they didn't scratch their heads in confusion. They knew exactly what he meant. That's why the high priest tore his robe. That detail is easy to miss. In Jewish law, you tore your robe when you heard something so offensive to God that words alone couldn't express your horror. But here's the part that should stop you cold: the horror wasn't confusion. It was recognition. The high priest understood the claim perfectly. And that understanding was precisely what condemned him. Because think about what was actually happening in that room. The men entrusted with watching for the Son of Man, the very ones whose job it was to recognize him, were the ones handing him over to Rome. To the beast empire. The same empire that Daniel's vision said would crush and devour. Without realizing it, or perhaps without caring, they had stepped into the role of the beasts in the story they claimed to believe. They told themselves they were defending God's honor. They dressed it in religious language. They followed the correct legal procedures. But underneath the ceremony, they were doing what every beast kingdom does: grabbing power and destroying what threatens it. This is one of the most haunting reversals in all of Scripture. The guardians became the danger. The watchmen missed the very thing they were watching for, not because the sign was hidden, but because they had decided, long before that night, what the Son of Man was supposed to look like. Here is the thing that is easy to miss. The people questioning Jesus that night were not ignorant. They knew their scriptures. They had studied Daniel. They could quote the Psalms from memory. These were not men who had never heard of the Messiah. They were men who had spent their whole lives waiting for him. And that is exactly what made it so dangerous. When you know the right words, there is a quiet temptation to believe that knowing them is enough. You learn the texts. You hold the correct positions. You build your identity around being someone who understands these things. And then the actual thing the texts were pointing to walks into the room, and it looks nothing like what you planned for. It is costly. It is inconvenient. It threatens everything you have carefully built. So you tear your robes. You call it blasphemy, and you feel completely justified. What is quietly stunning about Jesus in this moment is that he does not soften the claim to make it easier for anyone. He is exhausted. He is alone. There is no crowd cheering for him now. The room has already made its decision before the question was even asked. And into that room, with no protection and no exit, he still says, "I am." That took everything he had. And here is the turn that Daniel never quite saw coming, the detail that even careful readers sometimes glide past. The kingdom arriving on the clouds that Daniel described, it was not going to be launched from a palace. It was not coming through military victory or political power. The Son of Man who was supposed to be served came to give his life instead. Nobody expected the throne to be a cross. That was always the point. Subscribe, like, and share this video if you enjoyed it. It helps more than you know. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one.